thank the speaker for their speech, and I now welcome up the first speaker of the Affirming, Negating team.
Shane Jones is a minister that decided to support getting rid of tobacco laws which would save thousands of New Zealand lives. It's unclear why on his side he would care about every single thing about New Zealand and not his own selfish political interests. I'm going to do three things in this speech. Firstly, some setup and rebuttal, then talk about how this is detrimental to Māori, and then thirdly, and on environment. Right, firstly, on setup. Who are these companies? We think that they are largely overseas companies. Why is this? Because firstly, they need heaps of capital to be able to build these. You know, it's very expensive to do massive dams, a lot of concrete, a lot of wages. But secondly, we think it's just the economy of scale. When they're building these resources overseas, it's easier to import them. I think this means that, therefore, by not getting New Zealand companies, and therefore not, and that will have impacts on the debate. Secondly, we think this debate is in New Zealand because it's New Zealand grounded legislation. But thirdly, we think we ask, what do governments care about? Firstly, we think they care about jobs, right? Because it says there's a tangible immediate effect which equals votes, which means they care about the short-term interests. But secondly, we think they just flat out don't care about climate because it's a long-term thing, it's in the distance. We think it doesn't affect swing voters as the people that care about the environment, likely are strong enough to always vote the left-wing strong climate policies. They don't have impact on the elections. Some quick rebuttal. Firstly, they tell us that these ministers will make wise decisions. Three things. Firstly, they don't know about these local communities, so even if they're making wise decisions, they're making these perspectives from a Wellington perspective, they don't know much about North Otago. But secondly, we think that there are strong political incentives, which means that a wise decision for them is garnering up their base, which is able to, which might not support things like climate change. So they're, unlikely to care about things that don't give a direct incentive to the economy. But thirdly, we think they're just factually not in the moment, right? Look at Shane Jones with tobacco. Look at them rolling back the farming restrictions, which screw over climate change. Secondly, they claim that experts are going to contribute. But firstly, this assumes there are ministers who will listen, which I think is really assertive. They need to do more mechanisation for that second. But secondly, I think experts can contribute to council, right? And it's likely better so because these are likely local experts who know more about their community. Finally, they tell us about efficiency, how it's better on their side. But we think there are massive incentives for local councils to be efficient, right? Because it's a massive amount of investment in their community. Their voters want that. That's important. Right. Firstly, on Māori. I think the context here is that Te Tiriti or Waitangi guarantees Māori chiefmanship over their heritage land. They screw that over on their side of the house when they don't get that input. But land was illegally stolen, and I think continuing to stamp on that land is really harmful without getting a Māori input. But secondly, I think the Māori massively care about their land, right? Because they use it to gather kai. They have a strong connection to the whenua. That's why they talk about it in their mihi. It's something they care about. Why does this process harm Māori? Firstly, because they don't have to engage with iwi into this process, right? Because ministers want rapid speeds, which means that they and this would slow it down. Under the resource consents, they have to engage and think of the concerns. Secondly, we just think experts can't recognise stories of Māori, right? They come from an academic perspective and can't think of the history in terms of the kai that's collected from that land because they come from an academic perspective. We think this means they're probably infrastructure focused and not focused on Māori. Second mechanism, we think it's likely to target Māori land. Why is this? Because there's not a lot of spare land out there, right? And these things take up heaps of space, which means that it's and also these are overseas companies, so they don't understand the nuance and importance of this Māori land. Therefore, it's likely to be built on Māori land. This means that they're taking land that is should rightfully be Māori's or is used by Māori people, and they're using it for an infrastructure project. Thirdly, ministers just flat out don't care about Māori. Why? Because they're a minority voting bloc, and also we currently have a massively right-wing government that campaigned on dog whistles to Māori. The thing here is that projects, once they're approved, can't be reversed, which means that even if we have this for a small time and the government changes, the harms still stand, and so far the projects have been approved. The comparative is councils, right, where applicants must consider an account for Māori. Which ministers don't. We also think council interact with iwi more, and so far they have to deal with water and land, which means they are far more likely to have knowledge about it. The outcomes here. Firstly, it's just principally appalling that we're going to continue the historical harms that we have perpetrated against Māori. Every person in this room should feel guilty about that and the history. We shouldn't make it worse. But secondly, we feel like our voices are not heard, right? Because they've taken away the current process, their current ability to submit, and this is likely to make them further detached from a government they don't think serves them. I think also this is likely to lead to things like civil unrest, like the Toitu Te Tiriti protests that we've seen, which means they can't get efficiency on their side of the house at the point where there are mass protests against this, slowing these things down. We also think the importance of this is it harms a massively vulnerable stakeholder. Māori are screwed over in so many aspects of New Zealand. Let's not make it worse. Right, on environment. I think the context here is there are massive incentives to create renewables still under our side of the house. 5 reasons for this. Firstly, because energy through renewables allows you to bypass the ETS, the emissions trading scheme, which is going to be massively expensive into the future as it gets bids up. Secondly, conscious consumers care about climate change. They're not going to buy from people that are using coal. Thirdly, we think that renewables aren't finite, and when they become more and more finite, they will get more expensive. It's relatively cheaper to use renewables. Fourthly, government is massively incentivizing people to do renewables with things such as subsidies, with things like that. But fifthly, we think that that we currently see heaps of renewables being built. We are currently on track to be 100% renewable by 2030, whatever. And I think this means that that under our side, we're going to get the renewables we need because of those massive incentives. I think for them to claim they get better renewables, they need to respond to each and every one of those mechanisms. Right, why do we get better environment? Firstly, because we have certainty for developers. On their side, there is a massive risk if there are the mass protests I described to you. It looks like with Fletcher's, who wasn't able to build on Ihu Mātā land because of the mass protest. The risk of that is likely to mean developers just flat out won't do it. They will use their resources on another more certain industry. This means it will take way longer than a normal consent. That means they still don't get efficiency. Secondly, on biodiversity. New Zealand has a very intricate biodiversity system. New Zealand literally has the highest extinction rate in the world. We make that worse at the point where we aren't able to get the local aspects, because biodiversity is very different from Fiordland to Otago, and we think that local experts are able to do that. But thirdly, we think that they can't determine the effectiveness because they often use in these renewables very new technology, which means they are literally massive projects, which means if renewables break, they lose all of their benefits, and so far that it's will have been a massive cost for no energy benefit. This looks like a windmill being built on swampland because the minister didn't have the Māori ancestral knowledge. Note here that when we interact with Māori on our side of the house, Māori know about the history. They can see this in a POI, right? They know about where they have the hundreds of years of history to be able to know where is good to build, where is not. It looks like solar, being in a place with no sun. Shane Jones doesn't know about Otago. And how to build that. The outcomes here. Developers don't trust New Zealand. We don't get renewables built here. But secondly, if renewables happen, they destroy the biodiversity, which will do things like harm trees, which harms our climate. And they're likely to break down, which means that if these renewables break down, we have to pivot to coal, which is bad for the environment. For those reasons, I affirm.
Thank you for that speech, and I welcome up the second speaker of the affirmative team.
Oh, where's the tab?
Sorry? Oh, it's recording. I just relaxed quite a bit, so I've gone off.
Hopefully, I'm gonna read that back so it gets my head.
If you prefer, you can go onto the tab, see yourself.
where
It
is
just
the-
can lag a bit. It's just that one.
Ah,
It can
yes.
lag a bit so it can freak some people out.
Oh, no, that's alright.
Yeah?
Just as long as I'm in the frame. Okay, sorry. Starting my speech in 3, 2. If Nick truly cared about Māori and the livelihood, they would side with our side. We tell you that we actually care about Māori people. We tell you that we get better livelihood on our side because they are able to access renewable energy because of those benefits. Secondly, we also tell you that the likelihood of this process being legitimate, being eligible, and being reliable also is contingent and very well proven on our side that they have never sufficiently responded to. What I will do for you in my speech is a couple of things. One, I'm going to go on to some clarifications on what do these companies look like, because I feel like the characterization we heard at first is not reasonable. Secondly, I'm going to go over some rebuttals I have for the first speaker. Firstly, on their points, and then thirdly, I'm going to go on into my extension point on why we need renewable energy now and why it's a necessity. Okay, on to the first thing on clarifications. What did we hear from First Nick? We heard from First Nick that they case will believe that these organizations are international organizations. A couple of responses for this. One, they already told us down the line near the end of his speech that there's some companies doing this renewable energy. Note those companies probably does look like a lot of New Zealand-based companies, because New Zealand-based companies do have the capacity and the power to do so. For example, Spark. For example, Telecom or those other companies. We tell you that New Zealand companies are more likely and more able to do this because then they are able to go through legislative areas, because now they don't have to have the barrier on long-term international companies having to come into our government. Therefore, that probably means they get longer times on their side, because now international companies now actually have to get through this. We tell you that it's more reliable and more sensible to believe that these are New Zealand-based companies. One, because these New Zealand-based companies are obviously from New Zealand. Secondly, we also tell you that these public companies already have preconceived and understandable knowledge of tangata whenua, of Mātauranga Māori, although note that this is not able to be accessible to the higher extent that we tell you, but they still have that basic lack of knowledge, probably through news, probably through accessibility, other alternatives, measures that we have in New Zealand. Therefore, we tell you that it's more reasonable and likely to have this. Note, I will probably still, at their best, contingent on if international governments will do this. Note, if it is international organizations, they're probably international governments that have knowledge or are interested in New Zealand, because New Zealand is obviously a very green country, because we already have their motive and their incentive. Therefore, we tell you that even if we do have international governments, it's not a lot of people. Therefore, we tell you that New Zealand is on that. Now, onto some more rebuttals onto their case. What did we hear? We heard this idea of their response to this on wise decisions, they don't know, these people won't know. We told you at first that these are going to be intricate people, experts. We tell you that these experts probably look like they've already had a doctorate and understanding Mātauranga Māori. We tell you that they probably care about environmentalism. We tell you that they probably care about economics. We tell you that these people in these ministry actually have the database and the capacity to access larger information. We tell you that they still actually get information on the local government sector, because they probably are able to have the time and efficiency to that, because they are in government. They actually have the ability to go probably go ask probably their cabinet ministers oh hey, can we get some information on there? Therefore, it's more faster on our side and more reliable and efficient. Secondly, on political incentives might not be supreme about climate change, and it's not factual. We tell you, we already just told you that these are actually factual and they're real-time updates. We tell you that's really important. They also told us the comparative on their side is local governments will have the ability to do stuff. Therefore, a couple of responses to this. One, we tell you local governments aren't local councils aren't doing that much for their for their local electorates, and even if they are doing things that's not noted for climate change, they're more likely focused on like public transport or like those issues. However, we tell you that climate change is a significantly, really like important issue, which I'll get later on into my extension point on why that is important. But note that councils probably are very time poor, and or like they're probably work heavy, which means that they probably have that sitting on their desk, but within that, there's probably a large amount of proposals that they do have to go into. Therefore, it's never efficient and not time efficient. We tell you it is a necessity now because Māori are not, Māori is a dying language. We tell you that they are concerned, they're reliant on their land and their connection to their tangata whenua. We tell you, I'll extend on that later on into my speech. Okay, now on to, sure, I'll take one point.
To what degree does Christopher Bishop value Ngāti Māori?
Okay, Nick is telling me that this Christopher, whatever this person is, we're telling you no, this is not the person. We are telling you that the minister are the people who actually care, and what this model actually looks like is that it's probably going to be incentive people who actually care about environmentalism. Te Mātauranga Māori, going on to my case. They also taught us around Māori incentivized chiefmanship, this principle, right? We tell you at the point where Māori actually do care about themselves and they care about the generations that come after them, they will go and look for more sustainable and renewable ways. We already seen the fight and the protesting currently right now because they are trying to attain that. However, they're more likely to be okay, maybe this is not working, we need to go into another avenue. We are given renewable energy, which is a more accessible ability, which also maintains our connection to our whenua, but that also means our children have that connection to their whenua. On their side, their children are not ever able to because their land is probably sinking or because their rivers are being corrupted or corroded because of fossil fuels that are contingently proposed on their side of the house. There's no incentive revalue or distribution of renewable energy on their side. Sure, they conceded to the fact there are renewable energy sources and organizations coming up currently, but we tell you this is never enough because the livelihood of not only Māori people, but for people in general of New Zealand are detrimented on their side. At the end of this, we tell you this whole point around the environment and in terms of renewable energy, conscious bias, this outcome they try to prove in terms of certainty for developers. We already told you that does not weigh out. We tell you that these New Zealand government, New Zealand organizations are there. In terms of biodiversity, they don't care about local aspects. We tell you they do because of the. And then finally, on the note on this term of effectiveness, we tell you that these are organizations, they probably do have backup plans in case a windmill, a wind turbine, and note that this is probably not a huge outcome that they're trying to prove. So therefore, at the end of this, what have they proven? They've proven essentially that they take longer time. They're never able to actually effectively tell and help Māori in terms of their Mātauranga Māori and what they're trying to stand for. Well, however, what I have just proven already right now is that we actually get more effectiveness and why that's really important. Now onto my essential point on why we need renewable energy as a necessity. Context, right? We tell you that in our current climate of New Zealand, sure, we have current renewable energy organizations. However, it is never enough, right? We tell you that there's always room for improvement. Although New Zealand is a green country, we're also seen as internalized, there's probably we're not probably the most environmentally friendly at moments of our history. Secondly, we also tell you that renewable energy is really important. Couple mix for this. We also tell you that iwis are finding it really hard to maintain their own local regions because of things such as fossil fuels as well, and therefore they're very strenuous on that side. Couple mix. One, it tells us it means that people can now access more cheaper and renewable energy sources because Spark, for example, will now probably start to lower their prices because they see renewable energy as a constant source. Note that fossil fuels do end on their side. We tell you that increasing prices will continue to happen comparatively on their side. We tell you that prices will not increase. Sure, maybe in the very, very long term, but we tell you that outcome is outweighed by the fact that we have living, breathing Māori people and that local people are able to connect with their land. At the end of this impact, we tell you energy corporations are likely to follow this trend. People are more reliant on new renewable energy. Good because fossil fuels that largely contribute to global warming. Lands are less sinking. Good for Māori. People are now likely to turn more renewable resources. Stand for a side that actually gets more renewable energy resources out into people and local communities. So proud to be a Māori. Stand for Affirming.
Thank you for that speech, and I will come up the second speaker of the Negating team. If you don't want to see, you can just go to the other tab.
Oh,
Oh,
wrong one, that one,
yeah.
sorry. Perfect, thanks. Although even I am quite delusional to think that like I can leave the elevator in 2 minutes, I'm not as delusional as CESUT Affirming, who thinks like that, who thinks like cabinet ministers are really wise, and that's like make the cornerstone of their case around this on how they're going to make these wise decisions that are going to be absolutely amazing for the environment. Right? 3 things in this speech to go through. Firstly, how will ministers react? Then secondly, which side gets better outcomes in terms of like Māori, and then thirdly, like talking through how we actually better implement like combat the climate crisis, right? This is where a lot of like I think Affirming's case came about. So I think if I'm able to take this down, we take down really like the whole case. Okay then. So firstly, just on how will ministers react? Like they said like ministers will make wise decisions. Like 2 responses, and like they're incentivized to because they want voters to like vote them again, right? 2 responses here. Firstly, the ministers in New Zealand like currently are like Chris Bishop and like Shane Jones, and they just came back and responded with like, no, they're not, but that's just like factually correct. Like he's like the minister of like energy and like the minister of infrastructure. They can't really fight that. So these ministers on the National Party, their voters don't really care as much about like the environment. Therefore, they're not incentivized. If they want to like help their voters, they're not going to be like going for the environment. Then instead, we're going to go for the jobs. This is what we told you at SAM. They didn't respond to this. This still stands, right? Secondly, then we just say they don't know them as well as the councillors do. This is so important because we get input of councillors. We're not saying the councillors are making the renewable source, but we get input of them and they know the land better. But then thirdly then, I'm actually bringing you an extension here, we get better accountability. What does this mean? This means like that person in the community is actually like more likely to be able to go up to their councillor, like local council, and actually like tell them, hey, this wasn't like really good for our community, this is like very disruptive, we want this fixed. They can't really do this with like Shane Jones and Chris Bishop, right? So we think we have better accountability on the councillors, and we've like used their mechanism against them because the councillors also want to be re-elected, right? So they're going to want to do it well. Then secondly here, the second claim was that NZ has an image of like being green, so they don't want to ruin it. Firstly, this is just like a very small scale like claim. I'm like, they don't really mechanise like why like having this green image is like so important for New Zealand to have like this renewable energy source, and they care so much, like the cabinet ministers care so much about it. But we tell you that's like that secondly, that even if it is like for this to be the case, like you would want like the project to be successful, we bring you here that the project is more likely to be unsuccessful on their side when they have a fast track process, because that means that they're like not checking that like they're bypassing lots of regulations and like consent laws, that like they're not checking like the land they're building on. They're likely to bring like a swamp land or like a land that's maybe like about to rot or like more susceptible to like flooding. That means it's not like the windmill collapses, they're not going to get that renewable source that they want, and therefore we don't get like that green image, right? And the third claim here was that experts have knowledge and they're going to be like incentivized to help make like the cabinet minister incentivized to listen to them to like make the decisions. 2 things here, like first of all, the cabinet ministers literally just have a trump card, they don't have to listen to them. Secondly here, but we just say like the ministers have to know about the infrastructure and like are informed on the bridging. They don't know about every single place in New Zealand and like the biodiversity of this. This is so important because insofar they don't know that, they literally run the risk of like their renewable energy sources collapsing and failing, so they can't get any of the benefits they claim. We get this uniquely because we have those like councillor input through that consent process, that while we also have the expert process on our side, it's not like completely neglected, right? But then thirdly here, we say that like even if you don't like believe that, we see like the experts also just having like an incentive to please the cabinet ministers if they want like to be like the ones like advising them. So we do see that they're not going to be as like reliable as they're saying to be. At the end of this, what I prove to you is that the ministers aren't going to be acting as wisely as they claim to be. Instead, they're going to be acting in probably a way that benefits them the most and benefits their voters the most, because like they said, they want to be re-elected, so they're not going to be working towards like the best environment policy, but they're instead probably going to be working towards what's pleasing, like more jobs and stuff. Right then, how this impacts Māori, I think this is where they go critically unrespond to. The only thing they bring you here is that like this is going to help Māori because there's going to be more renewable energy sources that they can use and like people kind of be in jobs, right? Two responses. Firstly, this is like the same on either side because we have the same amount of projects, it's just that they're like fast tracking them, so it's like symmetrical in that case. But secondly, we just say that they don't have that job when the windmill collapses. They get those people out of that job. All of a sudden, this is so much more harmful for them because now they've like just relied on this like source of income that they've like completely like moved from them, and that means it's not as future proof, which we are. Right then, we actually bring you so much material here at SAM as well, like the 5 mechanisms that they didn't respond to. I won't go through them, and I'll move on to like the climate change point, just because that is where a lot of Affirming's debate take place, right? I think firstly here, the main claim they make is that like the climate change, like where they're going to help the climate change process better because they can fast track it so they can get to like making the renewable energy sources faster. Right, 4 responses here. Firstly, we flip that, and so far they're not checking the renewable energy impacts to the land and like that they're obligated to in the consent. They ignore the crumbling land beneath it. They ignore that that's like susceptible to flooding. When that windmill collapses, they're no longer able to get that like combat that climate crisis that they want to because they're not willing to. And why is this likely to be true? They said, we told you that like the US companies are likely to be buying it. Their response here was like Spark and like Telecom are like greatly incentivized to. Sure they are, but I think just in general, if they want like, we do like New Zealand, it's like just quite true that we rely on a lot of like US technology stuff and we're going to use their plans, etc. I don't think they would want to change their like plan or technology just for like a small investor that the New Zealand is, but we're still reliant on them because we don't have actually many other options because we don't see Spark and Telecom doing it and like the status quo, do we? Right. Secondly here, we just say that's symmetric because we also have renewable energy on our side and it's still being implemented because of the great incentives for the government to be future-proof. But why is it like uniquely better? Because we go through the process of checking through like the land for like the environment, the Māori community. So the land is now checked and like they recognise that when like where the windmill was going to be built was really harmful, so they move it and the project ends up being more successful because like the land doesn't flood anymore. Thirdly then, even if you believe like that like they set up the sources, why is it still better for our side on the climate change movement? Firstly, we have sources that last longer and likely to have higher quality because they've gone through the consent process. What this means is we can have more community input. They can like decide like if the hydrogen can be really disruptive to their like daily livelihoods. They're more likely to be able, like be built in a way that they don't have to be like deterred later on, etc. But secondly, we just see that like greater incentives for them to like have like make a like good one and greater accountability. Right, and then they just bring a claim about like how they need more renewables. I think we're currently meeting our targets, and that just doesn't engage with any of like SAM's 5 mechs. I'll take your POI now.
Land is sinking now. Tribes are being affected by global warming. Now, how does your side not delay the process of getting renewable energy change?
Okay, well, I think we actually deal with that quite effectively because I think I bring you here already that they literally sacrifice all their benefits on the chance that like this climate change process is so fast tracked and like that's not considering any of that. But we tell you here also that we are still getting like renewable energy on our side. It's completely uncharitable for them to think that we don't get this at all. It's just probably going to be like 1 year later at maximum. This isn't as bad because we're still going to get more quality and we're going to get more impact from like the councillors. Right then, I think at the end of this, what I prove to you is that they're not able to get like the massive benefit on climate change. Instead, what they get is like failed processes on and like in their best case, maybe like a marginal benefit, but that's not going to be that major on the global scale because New Zealand isn't just like a big contributor on the global scale. And I think that like impacts out a lot of their material because when like New Zealand isn't contributing so much, it's not that big of a deal, but it's more of a deal for the Māori people that we're affecting. Right then. Lastly, I just want to quickly like note here, like Sam brought you lots of material on the environment about like the biodiversity and stuff, but I just want to quickly note why does the breakdown does happen. Firstly, we tell you the breakdown happens because they can't determine the effectiveness because these ministers literally don't care. These experts want to like please them, right? There's literal massive projects. They can't just like have all these benefits full. But then this means this is really bad because they can't get the benefit of having that renewable energy to those Māori people that they want to. That is why at the end of this, counties only has like only supports like marginal climate change benefits, but Canterbury actually helps Māori like also flipping over climate change. Thank you.
Sorry. No. I thank the speaker for their speech, and I now welcome up the third speaker of the affirmative team.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Maybe on our side of the house, we have a lack of trust with Māori. But on their side of the house, you have a lack of trust with Māori, and your land is sinking, and your local council shuts you out because they're constantly having to be meeting with these construction people. 3 things to touch on in my speech. Firstly, on cabinet ministers and their choices and why they're likely to be good. Secondly, on efficiency. Thirdly, on the impact of on Māori people. Okay. Firstly, looking at wise choices, right? We tell you at first that there is a voter incentive, right? Because these ministers want long-term power, and they want to stay in the political game for as long as possible. Note that the way that you get a good reputation is by enhancing pre-existing good things, such as New Zealand's green image, and such as doing things that are for Māori people. Note that if they worsen the state of New Zealand's already green image, if they worsen the disparity between Māori people and the average New Zealand citizen, they're likely to face huge scrutiny for this. What do they say? They say that firstly, ministers are selfish. So true. We never said that ministers were not selfish. In fact, they are selfish to the point where they want voter incentive. That is why they are selfish. They act in the best interest of themselves. But the thing is, if they act in the best interest of themselves, they act in the best interest of their party, they want voter incentives, those mix still stand. But note here, they also say that governments are uninformed on these areas, right? But literally as we give you at Juan, what is stopping these people from asking their fellow cabinet and ministers? And what is stopping them from asking the experts that they are given and advised to take information from? Note that this never happens on their side, where you only have local councils that are always swarming in with the average person trying to get their welfare benefit, trying to get those things right. The third claim that they assert here is that if they care so much about voter incentive, the way that you get this voter incentive is through things like employment opportunities and jobs. Note that at Jenny, we told you that with renewable energy, a lot of employment opportunities already open up. But also, secondly, note that when you have renewable energy in the game faster, you decrease barriers to actually working and employment. For example, when you're no longer dependent on gas to fuel your car, to go all the way to your hour drive to work, you no longer have that barrier stopping you in the way when you're no longer codependent on fossil fuels. But the third claim to give here on my choices is that I guess these cabinet ministers don't really, care about these environmental decisions. A few things to note here. First of all, cabinet ministers would not be in politics if they did not care about the decisions they make. But we think that they still care about their policies to an extent. I think it's unreasonable to claim that these ministers are not necessarily the best people, they don't care about the environment regardless. So there's always an incentive to care about the environment when you have such a big green image like New Zealand. And note that even take one of our cabinet ministers Winston Peters, he's literally working towards improving climate change resistance for Kiribati right now as a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, right? We think that's an example of how these ministers are able to actually, make wise choices, and why even if they're selfish, they're still likely to act in the best interest of their voters. I'll take a point now.
The average national voter is a middle-aged white male. Do those voters care about climate change in Māori?
I mean, yeah. I think to some extent we should all care about Māori, right? Because, although, firstly, it's uncharitable to characterize all middle-aged white men as people who are just all national voters and don't care about the environment or Māori people. But secondly, no, they benefit from renewable energy too. These corporations are big corporations. They're likely to be the ones who are running them. They're likely to be the people who get employment opportunities. We think that it's uncharitable for them to assume that they don't care about this either. Okay, secondly, on efficiency, right? We give you 3 extremely good lines of analysis as to why it's likely to be inefficient. Firstly, we say that there's long waiting lists for constructions and for construction companies in these councils. Note that these councils aren't people who have maybe they have some spec knowledge to a degree about their area, but they mostly deal with individual cases rather than looking at the area as a whole, right? Note that they try and say that because governments have generalized knowledge on stuff, it's a bad thing because they don't know the specific the specific things about the area, right? But we flip this on them, right? Because if they have generalized knowledge, note that local councils, again, deal with welfare, they deal with grants. They're never able to really grasp Mātauranga Māori to the extent that a cabinet minister would, that an actual expert would, right? Which leads us to like the second line of analysis we give you as to why it's more efficient, which is that you have access to a larger scope of knowledge. Note that local councils have limited capacity because they have limited time and limited knowledge that they need to stay in the sector of. Note that governments actually have the access to these experts. They have the access to these resources and to people who are actually skilled in this field. Local councils don't have that or the time to be able to deal with these companies in an efficient manner. But thirdly, we know that if you don't go to your local council, you have to do the arduous task of figuring out the policies and legislation of Mātauranga Māori. Note that's very complex and very time inefficient, and you never get that from a local council. What do they say under this note then? They say that there's likely to be squabbling and there's likely to be protests, right? But note that's contingent on that analysis about bad decisions, which we've already disproved. But no, protests happen anyway, and the entire point of this policy is so that you sort of just cut out protesters and make decisions faster and easier that way. But then lastly, we say that the impact that this has when you get slower efficiency, they say that maybe they delayed the process by 1 year. We think that we don't have the time to wait around for our land to be sinking. But second, we think that the counterfactual is that these things never get approved when you have to go through unrealistic, extreme amounts of paperwork that delay the process and that are just overall terrible and an inconvenience, and we don't think companies have an incentive to do. Lastly then, on the impact on Māori. Let's quickly look at the outcomes that we give you on the benefits to Māori. We see that because cabinet ministers actually get advised by professionals who are Māori and who have good knowledge about Māori and who have good Māori perspective, they're likely to learn about this and advocate for more pro-Māori policies. We think that there's more employment opportunities for Māori if they tend to live in this area. We know that that's a big problem right now, especially that employment rates in Māori are very low. And then thirdly, note that these construction companies are literally hogging the welfare lines of these councils that you have to go through copious amounts of effort to actually get a decision made through. They claim that Māori have a say, right? We think that they still have a say to a degree where you can actually advise your local MP to speak out about an issue that you want heard. We think that there's still systems in place where Māori can get a say. We think that even in the case where they go to a council, right? Council members, if you look around, they're not Māori, right? It's they kind of assert throughout their case that councils are informed about Māori people, they're informed about their land. They haven't given us any sufficient analysis on this. Note that if you're for Māori, if you're for efficiency, and if you're for delaying the process of our island literally sinking, you have to side with proposition.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and I welcome up the third speaker of the negating team to close the substantive portion of this debate. Sorry, you could just give me a bucket.
That's fine. I'll just go on this side. I have to say, I felt quite overwhelmed at the beginning of the debate where the Affirming team brings out these 4 individual pathway to victories. We think this is the first critical mistake they make in the debate, since I don't think even the best debater in the world could prove these 4 things simultaneously in any debating world. So what is it that I need to do in my speech to further our margin of winning the debate? I think there's kind of 2 key steps that I need to step you through in the debate. The first one is about how we show that ministers ultimately are just going to ignore any input from Māori, and why this is comparative to councils who will have even just slightly more input. And secondly, on how we get even just marginally beneficial, better benefits to the environment and block their solo push, which kind of revolves around the environment. Note here, they don't engage with our Māori material until much later in the debate, and even if they do it first and second, it's not significant enough. So 3 things I'm going to address in my speech. The first is on the impact on Māori people living in Aotearoa. Secondly, on climate change, like effectiveness versus efficiency. And thirdly, on the incentives of cabinet ministers. So firstly, on the impact on Māori people. So note here, we weigh this super highly in the debate. Why? Because we think that Māori people, in the context of this debate, are a super vulnerable group that need to be benefited by the end of the debate. And secondly, we also tell you there just wasn't really much engagement from the affirming side. Sam brings you all of this really good material at first that I'm going to extend on, no thank you. And there just wasn't much engagement from them on this, and we think this was a crucial mistake that they made. So what are the pushes from the affirming team that we do end up getting? Firstly, they tell you that the lives of Māori people are negatively affected by the negative effects of climate change that are happening in the world. Firstly, I think we can just say, sure, this is true, Māori people will ultimately be affected by climate change like any other individual. However, we think it is way more negative on Māori people when a hydro dam is built right next to a community where they have historic land that is really special to a certain group of iwi that isn't fit to be built upon. This uproots their lives in the moment. They probably care way more about this than some island overseas that they care nothing about. They care about the issues in their lives. They don't care about the rest of the world being affected by climate change. They have bigger things to worry about. Secondly, they tell you that there is going to be more employment for Māori people because the introduction of these renewable sources in these areas will lead to them being employed. Firstly, I think it is highly unlikely that a government that is trying to build these renewable sources is going to hire these Māori people in the first place. There is a huge stereotype put on Māori people that disallows them from being able to get the degrees that they would need in order to work on these renewable source energy, these plants. This means they actually don't get this higher employment. And even if you believe all that stuff that Māori people are getting these jobs, we can still claim that on our side at the point in time that we are still building these renewable energy sources. Not once have Sam, Angam or I told you that we aren't going to keep maintaining NZ's goal to be green and to build these renewable energy sources. This was so uncharitable from them. I don't know where they've pulled this out from. What is another response that they give us here? They tell you that the councils that we bring up to you under this point aren't Māori or they don't know anything about Māori. Firstly, I'd like to point out, this is the same with the government. And in fact, it's probably even worse in the government because government currently, it's National, who a high portion of their voters are cis white men in their 50s who don't give a flying rat about climate change. They don't care about Māori people's rights because they totally they just ignore the Treaty of Waitangi because their lives would be negatively affected if this was prioritised. That is the incentive for these voters not to care. We really clearly map this out for you. So this proves that there is no incentive for Māori people to want to have these renewable energy sources put near their land unless they have input. We give you this material at SAM about why Māori people know so much about the land that they're living on. This needs to be taken into consideration. So at the end of this, I think we show you why the impact on Māori people is so huge on their side of the house, and why on our side, by cooperating with these Māori people, we create renewable energy sources that not only are good for NZ, yay, go green, but they also maintain a proper, good relation and honour the tiriti of Waitangi on our side of the house. So secondly, on the incentives of cabinet ministers. Under this point, yes.
Why would tangata whenua not care about whenua?
I'm not really sure where that's coming from. I think we really clearly tell you that Māori people do care about tangata whenua, and we really clearly show you that this means government needs to interact with them. If government doesn't interact with the Māori people, it just doesn't go anywhere. I'm not sure where that POI is coming from. So, on to the incentives and the decisions of cabinet ministers. What do they push here? They tell you ministers get voted in because they care about money, reputation, and the environment. However, why is it that they care about the environment? They tell us the only reason government cares about the environment is to avoid backlash. 3 responses here. Firstly, we totally agree on the fact that ministers care about money and reputation. This means their decisions are so corrupt. Secondly, they say that this whole push about how they only care about the environment because they want to avoid backlash. We tell you, ministers just don't care about the environment. They've made other promises that they need to fulfill in order to get elected. National makes promises about not taxing the rich so that they get voted in by this huge majority of voters. This means they don't really care about the environment. They'll make false lies, and also it's just really bad morale for the climate change movement if the only reason government is making these decisions is for the good reputation. Thirdly, the fact that the only reason that they care about the environment is to avoid backlash. This is the material they gave you. This means there is no incentive to rush to get these things done in order to swing voters and avoid backlash if they don't actually care about doing it. What's another push they give you here? They say that like NZ has this image of NZ green and we want to protect this. We totally agree with this. However, this means it is so incredibly important for any project done by New Zealand to be successful and to be of high quality. On their side, they're rushing this. This means they can't achieve this as well as we can at the point in time when we interact with Māori to ensure that like the land we're building like windmills on isn't going to crumble and isn't going to like cause high offence within a Māori community who see this land as like very historic and they're like very important to them. Next, they tell you that experts have the knowledge and help cabinet ministers make decisions. Firstly, the experts aren't making the decisions. We've clearly showed you that the people with the power, the people with the trump card, is these cabinet ministers. They hold the power. They like will take input, but they probably don't really care. They probably already got like a pre-assumed decision of what they want to do. If they don't care about the environment, that's not going to change just because an expert tells them that like the grass will be greener on the other side. Secondly, even if you believe that these experts have an input, they probably aren't, and they know heaps of stuff. They probably have no incentive to share that input at the point in time that their superior is the cabinet minister. They don't want to get fired from their job. They don't want to like be told off by a cabinet minister who is probably like issuing their paycheck at the end of the day. Also, lastly under this, they tell you that ministers are selfish because they want to swing voters. We tell you at Ungum, and I'm going to extend on this, it is so unlikely that any voter from the National Party is going to swing to like look after the environment. We tell you this is hugely unlikely because of the way we have characterised national voters and green voters. So now, lastly, onto climate change, effectiveness versus efficiency. Note here, the only thing they care about ultimately is about speed, and we think that this is just not important. I'm going to clearly outline this now. They tell you that renewable energy sources won't be built in living areas, but even if they are, there will be more work for people and cheaper energy. This is kind of low impact at the point in time that like they're contradicting themselves and they don't really map out these two clear ideas separately. Firstly though, if I'm responding and engaging, there is an incentive for these to be built in living areas because they need like the workers and stuff. So this just means that like they will be built in rural areas. Secondly, it's so unlikely that the energy is going to be cheaper because Ungum has really outlined to you why these cabinet ministers are probably going to make decisions that are only profitable for them, meaning the energy is probably going to be even more expensive for these people living in these areas. This is really bad. It's just like an excuse for government to make money. So at the end of all of this, I think we really prove to you why one pathway to victory is way more effective than four, and I'm so proud to negate.
Thank the speaker for their speech. As is customary, we'll now reverse the speaking order, and I invite up for the leader's reply.
Even if we pretend they get literally every single benefit they bring you in this debate, the thing that stops them from winning is the fact on our side we can still get all of the projects that they do. We get, even if they get Māori jobs, then we're still having the projects go ahead, right? On our side we still get the dams, the windmills, and the solar. We also get their environmental benefits once they're up and running. They never mechanised why efficiency was the crucial thing of the debate. They're going to lose. Three things: ministers, environment, Māori. Firstly, on ministers, they try and say they will make good decisions, but I think we show you, firstly, that they don't know about local views and they have political incentives to care about the short term in an election cycle. But they secondly tell us they wouldn't be in politics if they don't care about the environment. But I think they even at first they tell us that they care about money, and I think inherently politicians are selfish people who care about power. Note, if ministers don't care about Māori, then we automatically win the Māori point, automatically win the Māori clash, because there is a legislation mandate under councils that they have to. What we show is that their own voters don't care about climate change, and Ungum explains really well that and there are incentives to retain current voters. National won't ever win the Green voters. On the environment, they try and tell you that they're going to get better efficiency, but I think that we really well explain that there is if there is risk to the developer through things such as protests, through things such as shaky land, then they're going to not only build slower, but just not build at all. I think this, what we show you, I gave you 5 incentives as to why buildings would still occur under our side, because they're able to bypass the ETS, because of conscious consumers, because they're not finite resources, because of government incentives, and because people continually, and because we're just currently meeting these targets. None of those were responded to. You automatically have to buy those to the fullest extent, which means we still get those renewables. We also show about biodiversity, which I think also was never responded to. I explained to you how it was on the edge of collapse, and that the harms are, and how these harms flow into the climate. Because if our biodiversity collapses and we lose all of our trees, those trees can't capture carbon, and that harms the environment. I think it also is really bad for the environment if there are things such as right. Moving on. Even if you buy that we lose on the environment, which would be nonsensical given we flip their material through like 8 different ways, Angam explains how the environment is minimally affected by New Zealand, and that and so therefore you should care about Māori because we make a massive change comparative to their side. On Māori, they do heaps of weighing as to why this is an important issue in this debate, telling us that tangata whenua care about the whenua. I think that you have a principled obligation to care about Māori, and also they're by the far most vulnerable. They try and say, well, experts will know about Māori. They think, firstly, they will have a background in infrastructure, but I think Angam explains how they're likely to just be ignored by ministers. And I also think Angam explains how there's an incentive to just be pleased by ministers, and so far you want to keep your job. What do we show with Māori? We show that they under their side, they don't have to engage with ED. They're likely to target Māori land. Note that mechanism was never responded to. That ministers don't care about Māori through things such as the fact they're a minority voting bloc. The outcomes here is that they feel like their voices aren't heard. This leads to things such as this is just flat out a not good outcome to have, insofar you have a group of New Zealand that feels awful about their government. This could lead to things like civil unrest, like we saw previously with the protests. I think we show that the council has to care about Māori insofar that they are legislated to have to, and that they already have a close relationship with iwi and water. I think that the fact we show that we get at very least the same amount of renewables as them, but I think we extend and show we get far more. I think that blocks them from winning, but I think the fact that we win by a landslide on Māori means it's a very high margin debate.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and I now welcome up the affirmative for the reply to close this debate.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I've identified 4 points of clash today. Firstly, on how Māori will be affected during this fast-tracking process. Secondly, on how the environment will be affected. Thirdly, on whether the government will actually be incentivized to make good choices and those who are being carried out. And then finally, on the efficiency of the decision made. And I'll tell you how we have won on all 4 points of clash today. Okay, firstly, on how Māori will be affected by the fast track, right? So, the negating side have come up here and told us that, they don't actually care about Māori land, right? They're gonna impede on the sacred Māori land and all of these things, right? But, we actually tell you that, first of all, they're not gonna build on land that is extremely sacred, because they know that this is gonna get them backlash. They know this is not gonna get them voters. They know this is gonna result in protests, etc. They're not gonna do that flat out, right? But then even if in a case where they build on a land that is impeding on the sacred Māori land, we still tell you that there's actually long-term benefits that Māoris is getting, right? They're getting jobs, right? Even if they're just a builder on this construction, they're getting these jobs. They're getting or they could get the welfare from the economic benefits of this, or they can have a lower living cost, and they have a better country where there's less climate change, where there's a greener country, and there's also like just like a better government that they know actually cares about them. That's how we won on that point. Okay, secondly, on how the environment be affected, right? So they tell us that like local council is actually more informed on this location, and how on the outside of the house, like projects are gonna occur, they're gonna build a windmill and it's gonna like fall down. Okay, we tell you this is like absolutely nonsensical, because like, first of all, these are experts. We argue that experts is probably gonna have a lot more knowledgeable understanding than just the local council, because local council, they cares about their local, but the experts actually care, and they actually take in the context of the whole country, right? They actually care and will able to positively affect the whole country, and they're gonna know that this land is like not stable. They're not gonna build a windmill on it. That makes no sense. Okay, and yeah, like, so overall we say that like we have experts, and they have like an actual like holistic overview of this, and they actually know, rather than like just one Māori person who's gonna go talk to the local council. That's just the perspective of one person that is not as good as an expert who actually knows about this whole topic. And overall, this means that like we actually have like better effects for the environment. Okay, and then thirdly, on how the government is actually going to be incentivized, right? They tell us that they don't have incentives to care about the government. Okay, even we have given you a lot of mechanism about what they do, but even if they don't care about the environment, they know that their voters care about the environment, and they'll have an incentive to like cater to their voters who care about the environment. This means that they'll be incentivized to make good decisions that are informed by the experts, and decision that benefits the most people as well. And we believe that it makes we have given you a mechanism on why like people throughout New Zealand all care about the about environment and climate change, etc. Okay, so that's why we've won on that point. Okay, finally, on the efficiency. So they tell us that we're gonna get like protests, etc. Or like the project is, or even if like on their side of the house, they're gonna get like a 1 year delay, right? We tell you that this is actually not true. First of all, this process is fast track, which is extremely important because we need to act now. Climate change is happening now, and we need to act now. But then also, like, we tell you that like on their side of the house, there's gonna be like hundreds of people who need to like all agree on this. You need to take meetings, need to take etc. Like, even if this could take like years and years, or it could not happen at all after all of this, and nothing is done about climate change. And like we tell you that like there's no need to sit around on outside of the house to get these paperwork done. We can get them done now. Okay, so overall, I've proven how we've won on the 4 pathways to victory that I've said in the beginning of this debate, right? We proved that cabinet ministers are more likely to make wise decisions. These are made in an efficient manner. There's sustainable, positive environment change, and a larger scale of people are benefited. And at the end of this debate, we weigh that we win on the metric of scale. Like, even like we agree that Māori is important, but it's even more important to benefit Māori and the rest of New Zealand, and we also get a long-term impact from these environmental changes, right? And for those reasons, I'm proud to affirm. Thank you.
Thank the speaker for their speech and a great debate overall. I think now we'll just head outside.